Hi, everybody. A little bit of art and a little bit of woodworking. Hang with us. Hey, this week I wanted to talk about craft and art and the unrecognized, untapped potential of so very many people out there. I might even be talking about you, the person who might believe that they don't have a creative or artistic bone in their body, bereft of any talent, and relegated to watching other people's videos about creating stuff. While I applaud the makers, the creators, the craftspeople, and the artists, I especially applaud the people willing to give something new and creative a try. And so on the sunny Wednesday around lunchtime, I headed out of the house, went for a hike around the parks and the open public spaces of our local downtown area, and I quickly found I was surrounded by fresh murals, sculptures, and new inspiration. I wanted to try something that I had convinced myself for years that I was incapable of. And at different times in my life, I had tried to draw or paint and could not for the life of me figure out how to move the pencil or swirl a paintbrush to an end where the finished product looked like something somebody would recognize. Mom, it's a cat. See the tail? I can't really color inside the lines. I also wondered if being good at art was somehow based on genetics. Paloma Picasso may have picked up her talent from her father Pablo. Carrie Fisher and her mom, Debbie Reynolds, were both pretty talented. Billy Ray Cyrus and Miley, well, let's move on. Then again, Michelangelo's father was a government worker and thought that art was a waste of time. I mean, what's that tell you? On my own family tree, my mom went back to college late in life and studied art, and she flourished as a painter and a sculptor. So why can't I paint then? Within my own family, my wife excelled at quilting and knitting, totally self taught, loved her knitted baby alien creature, whose name we shall not speak. My youngest daughter creates some of the coolest jewelry and Christmas decorations with beads. My oldest daughter, not through any genetic boost from her parents, managed to master the drawing arts. And my son, who you've seen on our channel, creates some pretty wicked wood art, and not because I showed him how. So it's clear to me now that anyone, and I do mean anyone, who gets inspired by a photograph, painted art, a landscape, a sculpture, or any other form of artisanship can create something cool and valued and memory worthy with a little practice and a little hard work. You got this. So now we're back to the core of the story. I want to create something similar to one of my favorite art pieces of all time. Housed at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, there is just something about this work titled Freeform by Jackson Pollock. It grabs you. It's vibrant. It's widely recognized as a breakthrough piece and championed a new technique in the creation of modern art. So I'm going to let the Pollock guide me on my journey to create a colorful piece of modern art, and no paintbrushes are actually required.
If I had a black light, the place would look like a Jackson Pollock painting.
So I did quite a bit of reading about Jackson Pollock and the techniques that he used, and he barely ever used a paintbrush. He used paint stirrers, turkey basters, and a variety of other things to spread his paint. And although he used oil base, I'm going to wind up using latex enamel gloss. The trouble with latex is it's relatively thick, it doesn't flow very well, so I thinned it out with a little bit of water, about 20%. Then it was on to practice. And I just had some brown paper and I was trying to get the technique down. I wanted my lines to be fluid and curved. I tried a half of a pair of chopsticks. I had some paint stirrers. I had a dried brush that I could load up with paint as I'm doing here. And it was really difficult to get the lines to be smooth and curved. Jackson Pollock also from time to time would use body parts like a thumb or a hand to make an impression in the canvas. And so the practice session really helped me figure out how to work the canvas. One of the other things that I read that he used was a turkey baster, and I happen to have this epoxy syringe that you wind up using in boat building or for doing epoxy repairs, and that actually worked out great. One of my cameras had a great slow-mo feature. This was fun. But if you look at the way his red, white, and black work is laid out, the background canvas is a solid red. So that's what we'll start with. And although I put it on thick, I wound up thinning it out quite a bit or taking paint off. It also goes all the way around the edges. Pollock's technique always had the canvas sitting on the floor. And using his original work just as inspiration, not trying to copy it, just trying to get the feel for it. We start with moving white paint around the canvas in a series of curved lines, some thicker, some thinner lines, intersecting. And I wound up using the syringe to lay out the paint and also the wider piece of wood that you see here as the paint stirrer to kind of spread the paint out. And I was just looking to create a background white pattern because the black paint would be the finish coat on top. And after playing with it and after filling it up, filling in a couple of extra small lines, stepping back and looking at it again, we called it done. Now, the same technique was used with the black paint. And of course, in between each one of these layers, we had to let the paint dry. I didn't want the colors to run together, although on some other Pollock works, his paint colors did run together and blend. But on this, each paint layer was dry before we put another layer on top. And so the technique for me was to try to intersect the black paint with the white patterns. And again, a series of thinner lines mixed with thicker lines, trying to bring some curved shapes together. And I'm not a painter, but I had a lot of fun just winging it and giving it a try. And, because I just bought one of these pre-finished canvases from an arts and crafts store, it wasn't that expensive to give this project a try. And so I really encourage you guys to do this. Find something that you like as an inspiration. And especially when we're talking about modern art, you have the ability to create something really wonderful that you can be proud of. Because as this painting progressed, I had all kinds of doubt when I started the project, but I was really proud of the result. And again, back to the syringe, it wound up being a great addition to spreading out those thin lines. And wherever I wanted a thicker spot on the canvas, I brought out the paint stirrer, the wider piece of wood, and would help spread the paint a little bit. But for the most part, I tried not to touch the canvas much at all, which was really Pollock's technique as well. He let the paint coming off of whatever he used, whether it was a dry brush or a piece of wood, he painted in the air with his hand and let the paint fall on the canvas as he went. And that's what I tried to do.
Tell me that's not an original Pollock.
And now for the woodworking portion of our episode. Because the predominant colors of this work were black and red with white in the background, I was trying to pick two varieties of wood that would be as close to black as possible and then as close to red as possible. So the two varieties I picked were an African Wenge, which is this really dark piece of wood on the table saw. It's almost black in its coloration when you put a finish on it. And I was cutting thin strips here. In fact, I needed 8 of these at about a 1/4 inch thick. And I was going to sandwich these thin black strips on both sides of the Bubinga, which has got a reddish tone to it. It took forever to get this wood through the table saw because both of these varieties were
Bubinga!
quite dense and quite hard. And these Bubinga sections are about 3/4 of an inch thick. So ultimately, the width of my frame will wind up being a little bit over an inch in width. So I've got 4 sandwiches put together here. Bubinga sandwiched by 2 layers of Wenge. And it's easier just to do them all and clamp them all together, trying to keep the glue off the sections in between so they don't stick. And after the glue dried, they just need a little bit of trimming to make sure that the edges are clean. And again, had to go pretty slow here to let the saw get through the wood. Pretty cool little ribbon. And now we'll get the pieces measured out and cut on a 45-degree angle. And then using a framing clamp, we'll get the whole thing squeezed together and let it dry. Man, we use the heck out of this clamp too when we're building small pieces of furniture or anything that requires you to glue something up that's rectangular or square. It's a great little addition to the shop. Also, on 2 of my corners, the joints were pretty tight, but there was a tiny little gap. So while the glue was still wet, I just jammed in some sawdust and that fills it up nicely. Now, once it was dry, I felt pretty confident that the joints would stay, but to make it extra secure, I drilled in a 1/4-inch dowel on all 4 corners. And I'm just using walnut here, which matched the Wenge pretty closely. In fact, you'll see after I hammer this in and cut it off that it's hard to tell that there's any kind of a dowel in here at all. Gotta love this little Japanese flush cutting saw. And then the last bit of trim I put on this frame was I put a 45-degree bevel all the way around just for a little trim. I thought about using a round over bit, but I thought the beveled edge would look better on the frame. But I really like the two-tone nature of this frame. And with the finish on the Bubinga, it's going to look like a reddish brown center core, which goes with the painting really well. It's really pretty. The other thing I wanted to do is, if you look at the way that most works from Pollock or most modern artworks, very few of them are framed. If you see them in a museum, they're just hanging on the wall as a straight canvas. And I wanted the front edge of the canvas to be visible. So I put in these blocks of wood to allow the canvas to be inset in the frame, but yet it sits up above the frame slightly so you can see the edges of the canvas as well as the frame. And then I use some polyurethane semi-gloss to finish out the frame, and it really looks great. It has a nice sheen without being too glossy. Wonderful wood grain with the Bubinga. And once we get it wired up, the frame is actually pretty tight and pretty snug around the canvas. I am going to wind up putting some small brackets in back to make sure that the canvas is secure, but It's pretty good just the way it is. It turned out fantastic. The beautiful thing about modern art is it can be anything you want, and I really like the warmth of this painting. It brightens up the room.
I knew Jackson Pollock. Jackson Pollock was a friend of mine. This man is no Jackson Pollock.
Yeah, so what? Daddy-like. It was a fun project. I really encourage you guys to give something like this a try. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this week's video. And as always, if you like our content, we hope you give us a thumbs up, you subscribe to the channel, and if you hit the bell icon, you'll get notified every time we publish something new. Take care. One last thing. Please do your best to support local artists and local museums. And if you're a fan of Jackson Pollock like I am, consider making a donation to the Museum of Modern Art in New York. It's a fantastic place to visit.